So we're back again today to delve more into Boris Johnson's what he calls the build, the oh the infrastructure revolution. I almost forgot what it was called then. But yes, we're back to cover Boris's infrastructure revolution that was revealed yesterday. And if anything, it's not so much as a revolution, it's more a massive PR spin to appear like the Conservatives are doing something, to appear that they are keeping their promises, when in reality they're not. We've already discussed yesterday just how little actually this amount of money being spent on all these projects actually is. In fact, the first things that came out was that Boris said that he wanted to reinvigorate and rebuild Britain's schools, and he put forward the figure of about £1 billion. The teachers' union then came out and said, actually, to do this, you would actually need £7 billion. So he's about £6 billion off the figure of what he actually needs to be able to do that. In fact, they said that given this money, it literally equates to barely one classroom in every school in this country, and it's barely just covers that. So again, this money that has been touted as a revolution is hardly anything but. And again, we go on today's article. This comes from The Guardian. So we'll double down on levelling up. We will invest to fuel the animal spirits. We will not just bounce back, but we will bounce forward. Thus gibbered Boris Johnson this morning, sounding exactly like Franklin D. Roosevelt shortly after the latter's massive inebral hemorrhage, or, as the Prime Minister put it, part of his New Deal. Spending plans to restart the UK economy after the coronavirus announced today in Dudley. It sounds positively Rooseveltian. I'm not sure that's for you to say, old chap, but then again, Johnson's one of those falsely modest people who tells people what they're like rather than waiting for you to align on the judgment yourself. You know the type. I'm such a giver. I'd guess you call me Rooseveltian. I'm so random. I can't believe I just did that. I look at Chris Hemsworth's. I work as a Chris Hemsworth's lookalike at the Uxbridge area, but will travel to Hayes for the right job. Johnson went on to pledge that this would be a government that puts its arms around people in a time of crisis. But which people? For much of the past week, the papers have featured pictures of him with his arms around Richard Desmond. This is the business of Johnson's Housing Secretary, Robert Jerrick, rushing through a decision on a £1 billion property deal by Desmond to avoid the tycoon having to make a £40 million payment under the Community Infrastructure Levy, then having to quash the decision after he admitted it was unlawful. Quite where this fits into Michael Grove's distaste for the benefits for the growing increasingly concentrated in the hands of an already fortunate is unclear. Although, according to the Cabinet Secretary Mark Sidwell, who Johnson's Downing Street cabal has just knifed, the Prime Minister considers that matter closed. And according to the Health Secretary Matt Hancock, Johnson's Downing Street cabal will sooner or later knife the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister regards this matter as closed. How closed? Stop looking and ask questions, as Leicester is closed. Even so, many people may be unsure that they want their arms put around them by Johnson, who's increasingly looking like a photo snapped through a departing prison van at the end of a particularly disturbed criminal trial. He's possibly the only person in the country who has relished the closure of the hairdressers, providing him with the perfect cover for not having his hair trimmed. As currently announced, Johnson's new deal is just over 0.6 of the spend of Roosevelt's New Deal, which is perhaps why he's focused on upgrading the A15 in the Humber area than building the equivalent of the Lincoln Tunnel. He can't build you a Hoover Dam, but he can probably run a Hoover. Of course, one doesn't expect accurate historical references from the Prime Minister, who is 0.6% clever as he thinks he is. And as you well know, the last leader lucky enough to be selected for association with Johnson was Winston Churchill, with whom he wrote a book about, and there was quite a majestic review of the work by the time by Sir Richard Evans, who was the historian at Cambridge. Among the many highlights was the line, "The Germans did not capture Stalingrad, though this book claims they did." Anyway, build, 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 as Johnson's podium this morning had it. Once again, we find ourselves with the great cowboy builders cycle of Conservative rules, where the guys who basically caused the problem will now have to explain only they can fix it. Having spent decades starving your school of cash to the point of structural collapse, they now stand there tittering and glowing. Yes, you're going to need to rebuild that. Whole lot wants pulling out, but yeah, I can do it for you. Pause. Thank you, that would be nice. Gratitude doesn't cost you anything, does it, love? Or if you prefer, and who doesn't, the experience is akin to being held in a remote location and nursed by someone of a very specific variant of Munchausen syndrome by proxy. They make you sick so that they can make you better. Our medicine has lots of projects described as shovel-ready by Johnson, to whom it is tempting to apply the same phrase. If those projects are anything like the oven-ready Brexit deal, we can expect a ribbon-cutting date of about 5 billion outside a toilet somewhere by 2040. At least it can't be any worse than the government's clear pathway for the arts. To fall back on its favourite phrase, three things in which the UK is generally world-beating are financial services, arm manufacturing, and the creative industries. And I bet you never guessed which one the government is going to let burn. Then again, we are talking about the type of people for whom the answer to an inquiry, what would you most likely to see at the theatre, is Richard Desmond buying some luxury flats. Either way, Johnson's effort this morning would be your favourite construction-related speech since George Osborne, fresh from the moral, intellectual and strategic triumph of a 12 billion cut to in-work tax credits, stood up in 2015 and told the Conservative Party, "We are the builders." A reminder of the new things that he built after that. Things that Johnson hasn't built include an airport on an island in the Thames, a garden bridge, another bridge across the Irish Sea between Northern Ireland and the UK mainland, the fictional relationship with the truth, and still we all have to believe this time will be somehow different. The one good thing about the mood music coming from Downing Street is the obvious conclusion that the matter of the coronavirus is now closed. Come on, it has to be over. Otherwise, why wouldn't the government open pubs for the first time in 3 months on Saturday? Talk about a Midsummer's Night Scream. You would have to have literally zero understanding about what people like to do this, unless you were totally safe from both of those in terms of disease transmission and public order. It must be said that anyone with eyes, particularly in urban areas, has over the past few weeks been increasingly able to see people rightly, for the matter of the coronavirus, as closed. Rules have been flouted, huge gatherings gathered, and a potentially deadly sense of license is in the air. Who can blame people after all? Ever since Dominic Cummings broke lockdown to drive to Durham, like an elitist who can't handle his own childcare, polls have indicated that the scandal had an unprecedented cut-through, with one polling firm describing it as being incredibly unmatched. It is an extraordinary level of penetration. We have yet to see the full ripple effects of this defining moment. But for so many, something broke with that story. And whatever he achieves with the A15, that may yet turn out to be an organ grinder's legacy, no matter what his monkey is gibbering today. And that's true. I think the big test for the Tories is going to be the local elections. Obviously, we were meant to have them in May, but they've now obviously been moved to next year now. That will be the big test. And I think, given the disaster that is going to happen next year, the Conservatives are just going to lean from one disaster to the next, to the next, to the next. And sooner or later, I've said this, Boris Johnson will have to go. Lots of Tory MPs are now, preparing to sharpen their knives, waiting for the exact opportunity to strike. It's just a matter of when, not if. And when it comes to that, the next general election, I think the Tories are in for a complete drubbing. I can't see them walking away from anything anyway good, because there would have been, during that time, enough time to assess the impacts of Brexit, how well it went. Well, it's not going to go well, we can tell you that now. Again, the coronavirus will still, the impact and the legacy of that will still be ongoing. The fact that, as I've said, probably Johnson's, not only that, but Michael Grove's true agenda will be revealed next year, which will not be something that people actually want. It will be pretty much, austerity as usual. We've borrowed all this money, but it's only going to go to, shall we say, big companies who are basically going to put it in a vault somewhere, not actually going to spend it. And as we've already said, international investment from the UK has pretty much already been running in dribs and drabs, and after Brexit, it's certainly not going to be there. Not only that, the US trade deal will also be a big factor in the election, and I can tell you now, it will not be good. It is going to be touted by Brexiteers as a massive victory, but in no way will it be, in any way, shape or form, a victory for the British people. As I say, it will most probably strip away rights and allow America to send over their chlorinated chicken, hormone-injected beef, and of course have access not only that, but to our schools to make them more private so that they can make more money out of them, as instituted by a recent report by the Cato Institute. Not only that, but it will also open up the NHS and, of course, the US pharmaceutical industry, who will take it for everything it's worth. Those, ladies and gentlemen, are going to be the key issues that are going to be really prevalent at the next election. And let me tell you, as it was stated there, Boris Johnson and the Conservatives are the architects of all these problems. And Britain's problems are never ever been anything caused by being members of the European Union. We're about to experience lots of problems being outside of the European Union and not being members. And, we warned you. We told you this would happen. And as I said, you can start trying to chart your Brexit success from January of next year. And none of it is looking good, especially considering the fact that there hasn't even been a successful test of the border. Whoops.